Well, once again, thank you for coming to our spring networking lunch. We put on this luncheon event twice a year. And so this is our spring networking lunch. Every time we try to bring either a panel or business leaders together to talk about faith integration in the marketplace, or a thought leader. Like today, that we have a thought leader on AI is coming to speak to us. So today's topic, obviously, the reason that you're attracted to the topic is because of AI. Everybody know about AI. Everybody heard about AI. I try to gloss over the AI theme whenever I read a news item because I don't know AI. And I try to avoid using AI for ask students to avoid using AI for their work. So AI always evoke a wide range of thoughts and emotions in people, from excitement or optimism about its potential, or for other people, it's fear and anxiety like me, fear and anxiety about its implications, right? In most cases, people are just ignorant about what AI can and will do. Now, as Christians in the marketplace, how should we look at AI? And that's today's theme. So we are curious about AI's potential to blur the boundaries between facts and fiction, and also between rights and wrongs. Right? That's fundamentally what Christians should be worried about. Today, we welcome an AI expert who's also a strong Christian, who can help lift us from our ignorance and maybe raise or calm our fears. So Dr. Emily Wenger is a computer engineering professor at Duke and a former AI developer at Meta AI. Among the many, of course, you know that Meta is one of the in the forefront, right, in the AI development movement. Among the many recognitions she has received for her work is the prestigious Forbes 30 Under 30 Award for the year 2024, which is given to young leaders who are making a significant impact on society. Emily was educated at Wheaton College and the University of Chicago, both schools I have deep roots in. In fact, I was drawn to her because exactly of those connections. So without further ado, Dr. Emily Wenger. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks so much for having me. As I was telling a few people, I've never been to Houston, so it's been a joy to see your city and explore the little bit of it that I can while I'm here. So I'm here to talk to you today about the rapid ways that AI is changing our society and ways that we as Christians could thoughtfully engage with this technology to hopefully make it a better thing than perhaps it's on trend to be. I study how AI can be bad and how it goes wrong, and so I hope my talk isn't too pessimistic, but my plan today is to talk to you about some of my research that looks at different side effects of AI in society, and then end with a discussion of my personal thoughts as one Christian who works in this field about how I think other Christians might engage with this technology. So I don't have any deep theological insights. I just have one life lived in a lot of interaction with this technology, so I hope it's helpful. Just a little context, Ernest already introduced me, but I've been at Wheaton, and then after Wheaton, I worked in the government, in intelligence, in cybersecurity, which is how I got interested in kind of the security side of this technology. Went to UChicago, now I'm a professor at Duke studying and researching AI and security. As you're all aware, AI is a powerful tool. That's why we're all here today. It is impactful. It's changing things very rapidly in our economy, in our society, in our technological world. But it's also really complicated. It's complicated, first of all, in its terminology. I'm going to use the word or the phrase or acronym AI today generally to refer to what is known as generative AI technology. So AI models that learn from a lot of data and then actually produce outputs like text or images. AI is actually a heading over a huge set of different types of algorithms like reinforcement learning or image classification that we won't really touch on. The ethical implications of those things, classifiers, that kind of thing, is less fraught, I think, than generative AI technology specifically, because it has this creative power that previous algorithms have not accessed. So I could go on for a long time about how AI is an inappropriate term to describe this technology, but I'm going to use it because it's the common parlance, and when I say AI, I mean things like ChatGPT or Stable Diffusion. So yes, AI is powerful and it's complicated. It's complicated not just in a technical sense, in that it is technically complicated. It takes a lot of expertise to build and maintain these systems. But AI is complicated because generative AI systems do weird things that we don't always expect or like. I'm sure you all have paid attention to the news over the last few years, but generative AI systems have been used to do a variety of interesting things, not all of them good. So during the 2024 elections, there was someone, a magician, who created an AI-generated replica of former President Biden's voice to try and drum up votes. Weird. If you followed Google Gemini's controversy, Google had trained one of its AI models to generate very diverse outputs, generated image outputs that were diverse in unexpected ways. So it created racially diverse founding fathers and things that were nice, idealistic, but inaccurate. And there's lots of work in the legal space around whether generative AI models violate copyright law by being trained on and then potentially reproducing copyrighted work. Those court cases are ongoing, and it'll be interesting to see how they're resolved, because it will have a lot of implications, I think, for this technology. The problem that all these issues reflect, I think, is best captured in a quote by Norbert Wiener, who is a famous computer scientist and the father of a field called cybernetics, which is the study of circular feedback mechanisms in mechanical objects. Norbert Wiener said, "If we use to achieve our purposes a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot interfere effectively, we had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose we really desire." I think that quote continues to hold even more true today as we move into this age of generative AI. And I find it all the more impressive that Norbert Wiener died in 1964, far before any of the technology that's perhaps realizing some of the fears espoused in this quote ever existed. Dr. Wiener understood that putting a lot of trust and responsibility in machines that we don't understand is a tricky proposition, because we can't control how these machines behave or what they do, despite what we want to believe. And that's concerning. Essentially, Dr. Wiener is getting at something that many people, including myself, study in the academic world, which is something called the alignment problem. The potential disconnect between what an AI model does and what the human values are in the people who use and operate that system. Not to pick on Google, but I do think the Google Gemini example is a really good one of where this alignment problem can go wrong. So Google made its AI model produce racially diverse images of people in contexts where racial diversity was not appropriate. And so Gemini was aligned with cultural values of diversity and inclusion, but also broke our value of historicity and factual correctness. There are lots of other ways these models can misbehave. They can be racist, they can be biased, they can just be dead wrong. And it's all a really big mess, essentially. We're all trying to figure out what we want these models to do and whether the things we have right now are actually achieving that. I, however, think a little bit differently than other people on this alignment problem. Many people are really focused on ensuring that a model behaves in a specific way to avoid a particular ethical dilemma. I am pretty interested, and my research touches on consequences. So beyond just what a model spits out and what that means from an ethical perspective, I care about the broader world impacted by the rapid adoption and use of AI and what it might mean for people. So that's the heartbeat behind my research. I identify and try to fix these big unintended consequences of AI models. As a Christian, I feel like we're called to make society a better place, and understanding where the things we're trusting and idolizing in our society go wrong, I think is part of that repair process that I think is so important. So, I don't know, this is a Venn diagram. This is my research. I study kind of this intersection of AI and society. I also do cybersecurity, which I would love to talk to you about, but I will not touch in this talk. So I'm going to give you just 2 examples of research that I've done that illustrates interesting consequences of AI models in society that I think hold some lessons for all of us as we think about interacting with this technology. And it was also fun research to do, so I like to talk about it. So the first research project deals with the fact that AI models need a lot of data to be good at their job. I was telling Ernest this last night. My perspective on AI models is that they are giant statistical machines designed to reproduce the most likely outputs from their training data. And there's lots of academic research that says that the more training data you give these models, the more patterns they can emulate, the better they can speak or write or generate text, whatever you want them to do. So that's what AI practitioners have done. They've found more and more and more data to feed these models. ChatGPT is trained on at least 500 billion words. It's essentially the whole internet. Stable Diffusion, which is a very early image generative model, there's bigger and better models since then, was trained on 2.3 billion images, including lots of freeze frames from YouTube and pictures from Flickr and anything you might have posted online prior to 2022. Because, as I've alluded to, all of this data comes from essentially the internet. So our online interactions, whether we believe them to be private or expect them to be private, are generally used as fodder for training these machines. I think there's a lot of complicated questions around that beyond just copyright in terms of privacy and autonomy. But I am interested in how the use of online data to train AI models impacts society. And to explain one particular impact that my research has covered, I want to talk to you through the lens of a woman named Kelly. Kelly is someone that my research group has worked with, we've learned a lot from. Kelly is an artist. So Kelly has spent her whole life developing a very particular way of expressing herself in her art. So she loved drawing in her early years, and as she grew up, she developed her own particular style that really represents how she expresses her thoughts through art. It's evolved over time, but really kind of become canonized as she got older, and now Kelly is a professional artist, and she makes these really ethereal portraits that are very beautiful and very complex and very uniquely hers. And to survive as an artist in the modern era, Kelly runs an online business where she posts to Instagram, to a personal website, to something called ArtStation, which is kind of an aggregator for different artists' portfolios. And from that exposure that she gets online, Kelly receives commissions for things like Evanescence, and she makes sales of prints. So it's a good life. It's a fairly productive, profitable business, and she's found some success in the art world, which is a difficult feat. Why we ended up in contact with Kelly was because Kelly found out through sort of a side channel that over 50 of her paintings had been used to train large-scale image generative models. She didn't know, she just found out because someone happened to be digging through one public data set and found her portraits. So she never consented, she certainly didn't get compensated, and she never received any credit for the ways that her images enhanced the performance of this model. In fact, what someone could do with these images, and we did just to test, was fine-tune on the portfolio of Kelly's art in such a way that if you prompt this generative model with, make a woman with white curly hair and a ribbon, I need to get your perspective. This is Kelly's art on the right, left, I don't know. And the littler pictures are the AI model's outputs that are basically exactly mimicking what Kelly would have made. And I guess here's a few more. So why would you ever buy a print from Kelly when you could just have a generative AI model do it for you. It's cheaper, it's better. And in fact, it's a whole industry. There's a lot of online marketplaces where people will train models like this that mimic a particular artist and then offer them for download. So you can go in, take this model, bring it to your local computer, and then generate art in the style of your favorite artist. And then the people who make these articles or these models somewhat ironically ask for donations to support their important work. So it's a whole industry, and it's really hard for artists. We've talked to so many of them, and they feel like this. They've just been doing this beautiful work, and all of a sudden AI has come and taken that and used it for a different profit mode. As we were understanding the scope of this problem and talking to Kelly and other artists, we did a big survey of over 1,200 artists and found that there was a lot of deep sadness in the art community about what the downstream effect of generative AI might have on human artists. So a lot of concerns about loss of professional identity, economic disenfranchisement, and just general sadness. And to me, as, again, a Christian, this was sad because God made us to create. And so that we have these technological things that are discouraging creative human expression because of economic displacement felt really sad. And that was part of my motivation for wanting to get involved in this project. It also just makes me kind of mad, so that was the other motivation. And if you just looked online, which we did, we found all of these posts from artists who were just really depressed because they felt like generative AI was really taking over their lives, making them feel like it wasn't even worth pursuing their profession, or even worse. And so we can't solve this whole problem, we're just computer scientists, but what we felt we could do was build something that gave artists a little more agency in this game, that maybe they could feel like they weren't totally hopeless, and that there was some pushback that we could give to these massive AI models. And so what we ended up designing was a tool called Glaze. And Glaze is designed to protect artists from unwanted style mimicry by generative AI models. In our snazzy marketing, which some of our artist friends help us make, this is essentially how it works. If you post your art online with a weird perturbation that we design, then a generative AI model trained to try and replicate the artistic style in that piece will not be able to get it. It's essentially scrambled the pixels in a way that human eyes can't see, but generative AI models are fooled by. So you have some form of protection if you do want to have an online art portfolio. There's a paper if you want to read it. You don't have to. I'll explain it. So just the timeline. This all started back in 2022. We had done a previous project with similar motivations, trying to protect face images that were posted online. So if you posted your selfie to Instagram, we didn't want that to be automatically scraped and used to train a facial recognition engine that recognized you. So we had like a community of users and people interested from that, and through that group, some artists found us and said, hey, have you heard of text-to-image generative models that are replacing artists? And we said, no. And then we started working together. So we met with the Concept Art Association and a lot of really great art groups to help understand the scope of the problem. We worked with these artists to develop a tool that they felt they could use, that they understood, and that would be useful to them. And then it kind of ended up being a thing. There was a lot of news coverage. Since the publication of Glaze, it's been downloaded over 5 million times and used by thousands of artists around the world. So it's really gratifying to have research that feels like it's impactful and useful to people like these artists. So I'm just going to give you a super high overview of how this works. I won't get into too many details, but essentially, without the protection of Glaze, you can take these artworks from online, train a stable diffusion model to imitate a particular artist's style, and readily replicate random images in that style just wantonly. With Glaze, we perturb the content in such a way, it's essentially a dual mathematical optimization problem for anyone in the room who cares, where we minimize the visual perturbation to the image while maximizing a feature space distortion that corrupts the style perception of the model in the image. And then if you train a model on these modified images, you can't mimic the artist's style anymore. So here's some example of glazed artwork from some of the partner artists that we work with. So you can see on the portrait, you can't really tell anything. And even in this black and white cartoon, there's really minimal disruption. And so we worked a lot with artists to figure out the level of acceptable perturbation that they would be willing to incur on their art before they would be no longer willing to post it online. So we felt like we had a good balance. And here's some more. We worked with a lot of really cool artists. So just to give another sense of how well Glaze works, the different rows here are different types of art. This is how well, the middle is how well a generative model can reproduce it without Glaze, and the right is how well a generative model can reproduce it with Glaze. So we did a lot of work to make sure Glaze worked on a variety of types of art under different conditions with different perhaps adversarial actions by a model trainer who didn't want Glaze to disrupt their training and their content. So it was a lot of evaluation, but we believe Glaze is a fairly robust tool for this purpose. There's always risks when you put something like this out there. Maybe someone will break it. Maybe someone will misunderstand and think this is the be-all, end-all of fixing the generative AI art problem. It's not future-proof, and it certainly doesn't fix everything. We tried to communicate that really clearly, but we believed it was a useful tool to deploy, and so we did. And as I mentioned, it's been downloaded quite frequently. So if anyone's an artist in the room, there are Windows, Macs, and WAC downloads for this, I think Linux now, and it's also a web service, so I'm happy to chat with you about that. This is just kind of a wrap-up that I'll push through, but we had a lot of great support from the art community, and we're grateful. But to make sure I get to everything on time, the whole Glaze project came out of the fact that these models need a lot of data, and that training on certain subsets of data on the internet causes problems for people. But the second problem that my research has more recently begun to explore is not the economic impacts of training on certain data types, but the just very real impact of training a bunch of giant models on the exact same data set, essentially. Because all these different companies, Meta, Google, OpenAI, they're all taking the same internet that we all see and using it to feed and train their version of a text generative, image generative AI model. And one possible consequence of this that I'm interested in, and I think other people should be interested in, is that what if these models are just all the same thing? What if they're not actually these differentiated products that we see marketed to us, but in fact, they're just learning the same statistical representation of the world? And I'm not sure if I fully understand what that means, and I don't think it's always bad, but I think it's something we should consider. Because, for example, we would expect that, if we ask a bunch of different LLMs what a cow is, they should all give a factually correct response. They're good enough, they've seen enough data, they should probably be okay. What I would not expect is if I ask one of these or multiple of these different LLMs to tell me a funny story about a cow, I do not expect that they would all give me the same funny story. There's sort of an inherent perception that we have that if we're asking these models to be creative, and in fact they're marketed to us as being helpful creative assistants, that by definition creative means that they do different things when different people ask them to maybe do the same thing. And yeah, so like I said, this is a huge marketing push for many purveyors of AI models. We want to do AI for copywriting, we want to generate novels or write research articles or whatever. But the question is, will that actually make us more creative? Is engaging these models in creative processes going to lead us to these differentiated, interesting results? Or is it creating kind of a homogeneous atmosphere where anyone who uses an AI to write a story about a cow just writes the same story, and all of a sudden we have one story about cows? And I think you can think of more concerning outcomes than that. So I was curious. No one has done this cross-LLM assessment of how creative are they and are they differentiated in some meaningful way. And so I did. I wanted to. So the research question I had was, do today's large language models, sorry for the acronym, large language models like ChatGPT or, I don't know, Meta AI, Llama, behave more similarly than we would expect when responding to creative prompts? The answer is yes, to spoil everything. And how I assessed this with my co-author, who's a creative psychologist, was we ran a bunch of LLMs and then also a bunch of humans through a battery of creative tests that are generally known to be kind of markers of divergent thinking. And we compared the variability of their responses. So how different are the LLM responses from each other? How different are the human responses from each other? And what we found, I won't get into all the graphs, but this is basically, if you just look at a single answer from an LLM or a human and you ask, was this a creative answer? And generally, yes, both groups are creative, and you can see these histograms overlap. So humans and LLMs are roughly creative at the same rate when you kind of measure the individual creativity of a response. But when you look at the variability, you ask, how different are these responses from each other? The humans, the blue, are higher on the variability metric than the LLMs, which are much lower. And essentially this means that all the LLMs, when asked to give creative prompts, regardless of what it was, they tended to respond in very similar ways. Having spent a lot of time looking at this data, it turns out the LLMs are really into DIY as a solution to a lot of creative problems, so they would always talk about their DIY ideas. This is kind of a unique data visualization of this, where all the dots are different responses from humans and LLMs, and the bolder dots are from LLMs, and the more diffuse dots are from humans. And without getting into the technical details, what you see is all the LLMs are clustered together in the center of these different colored regions, versus the human responses being much more diffuse. So this is called a feature space. This is kind of like a semantic mathematical representation of words and phrases that these different groups outputted. And as you can see, even through this lens, there's much more clustering in the LLMs. I tried a lot of mitigation strategies. They didn't really work. And I don't know, it's just an interesting result. Part of, I think, the reason behind this is I saw that LLMs exhibit much lower lexical diversity. So LLMs used only 750 unique words versus human used merely twice as many. So it might just be that. If these models are just statistical engines repeating the most likely thing, then they're going to have a much smaller set of things they're likely to output versus humans who think weird thoughts and suddenly say a word that's less common. I don't know. I'm still interpreting this. I'm not sure what to do with it. I think there's some interesting implications, though. So if we all use generative AI creative assistants to write our emails or write our blog posts or whatever, are we all going to be driven towards a suboptimal creative minima, regardless of the model that we use? I don't know. This doesn't look great. I think it's an interesting pushback to the really hard push by many companies to adopt LLM-like tools to automate workflows. I think there's other aspects of this possible homogeneity that I think would be interesting to explore in the future that I plan to, like, are there cybersecurity features that these models align on in interesting and harmful ways? But like I said, I don't know. If you have ideas, let me know. I have just a couple of more minutes, and so I wanted to end with, Ernest asked me to talk about what I think Christians should do in this age of AI. And as I said at the beginning, I am just one Christian with some opinions. So take this all with a lot of salt. But I wanted to start by talking not necessarily at a spiritual level, but just kind of at a pragmatic level. And I have a little clip from kind of a deep cut. Has anyone seen The Lost World, the sequel to Jurassic Park from 1997? Okay. There's some interesting and relevant thoughts here. I think even though that clip is about biotechnology and the risks of cloning dinosaurs, it has some relevance for our discussion today. There's so much energy around AI, and there are so many ways in which it could be leveraged for good. But there's such an ease to this technology in how we can log in to a chat window and suddenly leverage this thing that we don't really understand to do something that we think will be useful. And I think that's the real danger of it. It's become so accessible to so many, which can be powerful, but it's the ease of use, I think, similarly to what Ian Malcolm is saying in this clip, that makes me concerned. So this is just more of a, I don't think any of you are necessarily in the AI business, but I do take umbrage a little bit with the term responsible AI, because I find it often is used for ethics whitewashing. It often just means we made a model that's not too racist or biased, and we kind of were respectful about the energy usage. And I think there needs to be more questioning of whether AI is responsible for this use, not if this model that we already decided was a good idea was built in a way that we thought was okay. There are some undergraduates here, so for you all, how is your use of AI technology forming you? Is it forming you into a more thoughtful, inquisitive, mindful person? Or is it allowing you to shortcut the important work of creative thinking and learning? I don't know. The jury's out on whether it will actually cause that kind of atrophication of our creative abilities, but I think it's a question worth asking yourself before you dive in and use it to write your next essay. There's also significant economic and environmental cost to generating an image or an essay with ChatGPT, and I think that should be something we're, as Christians, very mindful of. So those are my generic thoughts. My questions for Christians specifically, I have two things that kind of guide how I think about this, and my thinking is so immature and God has a lot of work to do, so again, take this all with a grain of salt. I find the artificial intelligence evangelical statement of principles from a few years ago really thoughtful and helpful. And one line from it that I go back to a lot is that we deny that the use of AI is morally neutral, and it is not worthy of man's hope, worship, or love. And I think there's a lot of worship going on, even implicitly, in how we talk about this technology as if it's a savior, as if it's going to solve so many problems. And I think as Christians, it's good to remember that it is not that, even if it is a helpful tool. And this is my verse as I do all this work, is that we are called to walk as children of light and try and discern what is good and pleasing to the Lord. And that is very hard in this space because everything is fraught. There's pros and cons to everything that we do in AI, and I don't know, it's just hard. So I think we have a call as Christians, as we interact with this technology, as we think about adopting it into our business workflows, to live intentionally and justly and hopefully. And just to quickly go into that, I think this is an amazing opportunity for Christians. If you haven't already had a conversation with someone about what it means to be human as a result of the advancement of AI, maybe I have more conversations than the average person because of my role. But this is an incredible witness opportunity that's never been presented to the modern church. We are being forced to reckon with the question of when or if these systems will become human, which I don't believe they will, but people do. And I think we as Christians need to be prepared to engage with those questions with grace and faithfulness. Also, this technology, as much as I've bashed it today, is a good thing. There are good things about it, and I think we as Christians should be on the forefront of finding ways that AI can be used to advance God's glory, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, advancing the gospel. I think there are a lot of ways AI shouldn't be used, and we as Christians should also be careful and discerning in how we think about that. But I really believe the verse from Esther that we are called to be in a place for such a time as this. David was talking about how we need more Christian business leaders. We also need more Christian technologists, and we need Christian business workers in the companies making this technology to be really thoughtful and careful and prayerful about what it means to move this technology forward. There's a lot of issues of justice, particularly around environmental costs, I believe, of this technology that we as Christians should be thoughtful about before we, ask our company to train a massive AI model that takes more than, a year's worth of carbon. There are thousands of really underpaid crowd workers around the world who are tasked with telling AI that what it made was malicious or harmful. And these people are starting to kind of be visible, and we're learning about how much it's traumatized them to be involved in the creation and alignment of these models. And so I don't really know what a Christian response is to that, but it's got to be something. And there are real social costs when we adopt algorithms that we don't fully understand into places of great importance and power. These algorithms discriminate, and they do so regularly, and we as Christians need to be thinking carefully about whether an algorithm deserves to be in a place of decision-making power in certain parts of our society. And for those of you who are interested in thinking more about these things specifically, these are not Christian books, but they are very good books. The Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford is a lot about how these technologies are made. And Automating Inequality is a really good look at how adopting algorithmic systems, even simpler ones than generative AI, into social decision-making can really disenfranchise people. But to end on a hopeful note, I don't think Christians should be techno-optimists because I don't think technology is what's going to save the world. I also don't think Christians should be breathless about AI's powers because it is not anything breathtaking. It is just something that some people made. But I think Christians should be grounded in the reality that only Jesus saves and only God will renew the world. And because of that, I also don't think we can be too pessimistic about AI, because if God is in control, then this technology will never dominate in the way some people predict. And I think this technology, as I've alluded to, provides us with tools that, if we use them carefully, can aid our efforts to advance the kingdom of God. And the question is, how careful are we? And are we thoughtful and prayerful enough to understand when and where it's appropriate to use these tools? And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to understand exactly what that looks like. And that's all I have. So thank you very much for your time.
We have about 10-15 minutes of Q&A. Anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We have some microphone at the back. They can deliver it to you. So please raise your hand.
I'm going to take the question first, and I'll deliver the microphone.
Okay, David.
All right. Dr. Wenger, first I want to thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot. I especially really appreciated how your work and research is actually having practical impact. I think the Academy has a lot of work to do there, and so thank you for modeling that. The question is actually just somewhat of a fun one, but related to what you were saying. You talked about creativity you suggested that it's going to be a scarce resource. I totally agree, and I think critical thinking related to that is going to be really kind of a scarce resources. So if we're up to you and you had to redesign a university as we're training up new leaders, how would you redesign it? What would you do differently?
Oh boy. Redesign a whole university? Okay. I mean, I think the biggest thing I would do is keep AI as much out of the classroom as I can, and allow it to be used in specific classes that are teaching you how to use AI, but avoid letting it be a regular part of the curriculum, because it's really easy to learn how to use these tools. Many people can do it. And so the argument that, like, well, it's happening out in the world, so we need to make sure our students understand it, that's reasonable, but I think they'll pick it up. It'll be fine. I think what we need is people who can think more and think differently than the machine and be able to operate, if they do end up using AI models in these jobs, operate these tools with wisdom and with domain expertise. And you just can't gain that when you don't have the push to think intellectually. So I don't know. I talk about AI. I think about AI. That's the biggest change I would make.
Hi. I'd like to get your thoughts, comments concerning those, especially secular, who see these even large language models as eventually someday being sentient and referring to them as God, so to speak. And for instance, ChatGPT's last version that tried to duplicate itself when it realized it was going to be replaced by a newer version.
Yeah, I mean, statistical patterns can be somewhat funny sometimes, and they can say things that are convincing and scary, even if they're false. I have two thoughts. One, I'm very careful never to anthropomorphize these systems. I don't believe they're worthy of that. I don't think they are that, so I don't know if that's thought-provoking to you as a Christian, but that's how I engage with thinking about the eventual sentience or not of these things. I think the way that many people interact with these systems as potential saviors makes sense. We live in an increasingly secular society. We all recognize that there's a need for something bigger than us, and this is the latest, greatest thing. When I engage with people on that specific question, my argument tends to be quite technical of, all these models have is the whole internet to train on. Do we really think that something just trained on the internet with a little special sauce from some smart engineers is going to be godlike? That doesn't always fly, but I don't know. I think it ultimately requires a lot of compassion and understanding that to deify these systems in some way comes from a real lack of hope about everything else going on in the world.
So as we study this, I know that there's a concept out there that gets put out called the singularity, which is this moment of like self-awareness. And in some of the models that you were showing, where AI is less creative than human beings, I wonder, do you see that moving? And is there a point at which there is something that resembles self-awareness within these systems?
What is self-awareness? I don't know. I truly don't know. I mean, I think that these models are getting better and worse at the same time. There's evidence that they're actually degrading in some ways because we're running out of data to train them on, but yet we have more clever algorithms for sort of tweaking their behavior, so they get better. I don't know. I think, to be honest, there's a spectrum of risks that you can be concerned about with AI. There's like, these systems are racist. These systems might cause like problems in society that are bigger than we understand. This is where I am. There are people who are worried about AI bioweapons. There are people who are worried about the singularity. I'm still just worried enough about this point that I haven't thought that much down there. And I also, because of my Christian beliefs, don't believe that there will ever be whatever that spark is in one of these systems that makes us human. So by definition, then the singularity isn't a problem, but just my opinion.
As AI become more advanced and as technology become more advanced, we are dealing with quantum computer. I have a question about as far as regulation. Is there a regulation in place as far as national level to even international level that one country, like for example America or China, don't take advantage of a country in third world country, something like that? Is there a entity out there that is put in place to regulate and just to prevent all the immoral transition that AI could potentially make?
No. There is a lot of effort in the EU and by a body called the OECD to do some level of AI regulation. Not every country plays by those rules. I think finding an international body to govern all of the AI systems in the world would be an impossible task. I mean, we couldn't really do it well, we kind of did it with nuclear weapons, I guess. Yeah, and then at a federal level in the US, the Biden administration had like an executive order on AI safety. The Trump administration has scrapped that, and they have a new focus. So that landscape is evolving and pretty hard to understand. But yeah, it's all happening. People are thinking about it, but there's nothing standard, especially at the global level.
Thank you, Dr. Wenger. I have a question regarding the Glaze program you have. So we have legislation in place today where if someone were to go onto the website of these amazing artists and learn from their drawing styles and be able to perfectly recreate their art style, they would not be allowed to simply just go and sell the perfect mimicry of their art pieces. And I'm wondering if you think the emergence of the AI mimicry industry of these art is a failure in legislation, as well as the problem with AI itself.
To your first point, you said if someone takes all the art and then trains a model to replicate it perfectly, that's illegal?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's not. That's the thing. That's the huge question being litigated in the courts right now is a generative AI model replicating content, is that expressive? Is that copyrightable? Is that a violation of copyright, or is it something else? So that is the first failure, that we don't even have a legal definition of what copyright means with respect to these generative models. So that's one problem. And then, yeah, I think the courts are dealing with like an unprecedented thing, which is potentially copyright violation at scale of like the whole internet. And so it's a legislative failure, but not necessarily one that could have been anticipated, because I don't think anyone anticipated taking the whole internet and using it to create something that could recreate the training data. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Are you finding that you're often in rooms where you're able to have conversations that sort of promote this faith integration aspect, either passively or overtly? Personally, are you finding like-minded friends in the space where you get to kind of impact the governance that may or may not come that way?
Thanks for asking. There are two categories. I do feel like there are some spaces where I'm finding Christians specifically in AI research, and that's been really encouraging. It's really nice when I find those people, and it makes me feel a little like less alone. There are also, I find a lot of common ground with people who just are generally concerned about AI. We may not share the same moral groundings or the reasons behind our morals, but there are a lot of people who really care about these systems, and so it's nice to be in community with them as well, even if the faith aspect isn't shared. So, thanks.
Thank you for all you've shared so far. So I have a question about cultural shifts that you're seeing as you're studying the models. So there are a group of us in this room who grew up without an internet. That wasn't part of their childhood. There was a group of us that grew up being told with a lot of sarcasm in your voice, well, it's on the internet, so it must be true. And then there's a group, my kids and others, who are growing up thinking, well, it's on the internet, it must be true. But with no sarcasm, it's just this AI, truth has been scraped and then delivered to me. So how is that being measured, that kind of loss of ability to think, and what are you seeing that's being successful in that classroom environment, helping to really scrape through truth and beauty? Because AI is there, right? It's, yes, keep it out, but it's there. They see it all the time at this young age. So what are the things that you're seeing, or is there research being done on that cultural shift of just accepting it because it's there? What are you seeing that help us to cultivate an understanding and a knowledge of truth and beauty for the people, especially the young generations, who it's always been just served to them on a platter? They haven't had to do the grit. You don't have to solve the world's problems. I'm just curious what research is out there with those cultural shifts.
That's a great question. As the mother of a young daughter, I also think about this, and it's scary to raise kids in an age where truth feels so elusive. There are lots of, I can only speak for Duke in terms of like the classroom stuff that I've seen, and I guess University of Chicago. There are really good classes that thoughtful people, that Christians are teaching about questions of truth in the age that we live in. So I hope that students take those and engage well with that material, and that they're offered elsewhere. I am sure there's research in sociology that's studying this change, but a piece that I found a little hopeful is I kind of engage with toddlers and then freshmen in college, and I don't really engage with that middle gap. So the toddler crowd doesn't have much to say. The freshmen in college, at least I've seen some skepticism of, AI-generated stuff might not be the real thing. There's still very much, I'm speaking in huge generalities, an attitude of like ease, you know, we can get this really fast, let's use it. But there's also some helpful skepticism I'm seeing of AI content, and so I hope that continues and that this generation is aware that they live in a real truth minefield.
Thank you, Dr. Wenger. I appreciate your presentation. It's very informative. I wanted to ask about AI security because that's
I love AI security.
What you love. So I was wondering if you had a best practice or a couple of best practices for us as Christians or just as people in general to be more secure in how we operate with AI as individuals.
Don't put your private information into that chat box. I've heard people talking about using generative AI models like ChatGPT to diagnose medical conditions. Don't do that. That data is taken, it's used, it's not private. I would say that's the biggest security practice. Okay. I think, or privacy practice. From a security perspective, I really worry a lot about AI automating phishing and other sort of social engineering campaigns at scale. And so with my family, we talk about like, if you ever get a call from me, you know, here's the word that I should know. And if I don't know that word or that phrase, then it's not me. Because I know my grandparents have gotten calls that pretend to be me and they're not. And AI will, powerful synthetic voice generators and powerful text writers will only make that worse. So I don't know, have a conversation with your loved ones about how to know if it's you on the phone when it seems really dire.
Thank you.
One more question? Last question? Anyone? Anyone have a question on AI?
Hi. I was wondering if there was any preventative measures that were being taken with videos, because I know Glaze was used for images. Are there any used for videos?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
My former research lab just put out a new video Glaze thing. It's just a research paper right now. I think it just got accepted to a conference, so I haven't been involved, but I know it's a thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's give a great hand to Emily. Great job. Thank you so much. I apologize because Emily has to catch a plane, so we have to let her go. Okay, if we have a quick question right afterward, or we want to take a picture with her, now's the time. So thank you again for coming. Look out for our email announcement for the next event, which is in October 4th, I think. That's the time for the next networking luncheon. Thank you for coming.